So the inspiration for the Symphony GFC was to see if we could put to music the great emotions that people went through during the global financial crisis. And it was an experiment to see if we could bring art and music to meet finance. But perhaps I guess that experiment's been done before by pop bands like Pink Floyd and the Beatles, but I don't know of anyone who's done it with classical music.
First of all, I drew on Doug's initial plan, which was to have 3 movements. The first would be the rise of money-making investors during the GFC, and the greed and the rolling kind of the bubble getting bigger. And the second movement was going to be the crash and the fall of global markets. And the third movement would be an uncertain recovery process and a hope for the future, but an uncertain hope. And that was the first inspiration. I wrote down some themes for each movement, and I kept those in my head, in my little diary. And another thing was I went to see, halfway through when I was getting sort of lost for inspiration, during the second movement, the desolation of the crash, I went to see a movie that Doug recommended, which was called Inside Job, which was about the GFC, specifically about the people in power who stayed in power and the effect it had on the globe, obviously. And so that was also the music of that, which was movie music and more background, low, menacing music inspired me more in the second movement.
First of all, I took him through a visual chart of the stock market, through the up, the down, and the recovery afterwards. And we also spent a bit of time going through some of the key moments. And it was to Gawain's credit, we actually found in the music piece quite a few interesting things, like the Zorba dance at the end, which was a homage to the Greek default bond crisis, and also we heard a little bit of Danny Boy, which was when the Irish banking system was looking very fragile. So emotions of investors really rode that roller coaster. There was a sense of self-confidence and happiness with people actually making money and achieving their goals. And then that changed quite abruptly. There was a bit of surprise, and that surprise was a little bit of disbelief. And then I think people felt fear and eventually despair. And a bit like the music, there was a little bit of hope, but it was a fragile hope. There were a few setbacks that came through, but I think people today feel a bit optimistic about the future with perhaps a question mark.
I kept the emotions fairly simple in the music, that there's a buoyant mood at the start where I call it the waltz of money-making, the money-making waltz, and it's just carefree, everything's going well with the world. And then the second theme of the first movement is a more serious making money theme. It's like a churning machine, chunk, 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 churning out the money. But that's not about the emotion of the investors so much, but it is then a serious note creeps in towards the end of the first movement, and we have that first sense of dread of, oh, maybe something's not quite right. Then there's the crash, and the fall of the markets is very literally translated into music in slides, downward arpeggios and things. And it's a very obvious emotion of bleak desolation. And then in the third movement, there's a more hopeful recovery emotion. Some of it's quite majestic almost, and it's more about standing back. It's not individual people's emotions, but it's an emotion about the process of recovering, being hopeful. But some uncertainty creeps into that and always interrupts the majestic themes and goes, no, we're not sure. Is it right? Is it getting better? So that's how I did the emotions.
We regularly play music that's composed by young emerging composers from Melbourne University and the National Academy of Music. And this is a bit different. This is new, this is commissioned, and there's a theme behind this music that's really relevant to the finance community, which is quite special. We don't often see anything like this. We recorded it and we had so much fun with it because this is just a little bit unusual. There were some orchestration choices made by Gawain that was very interesting. There was a part where we had the percussionist play egg shakers through the thing. It sounds a bit like money bag shaking. It was really, really funny. We had a good time with that.
I've written for orchestra once before, but it wasn't a professional orchestra like this. I was still discovering a lot of the instrument's capabilities. I found that the violins captured a slide very effectively, and the drum, I used the bass drum quite a lot in the piece to display emphasis, and especially during the crash, the overall fall of the markets and the cymbals and the drum. So percussion was an element. But yeah, I used the saxophone because I play sax and I love the idea of using unconventional instrumentation in an orchestra, and sax isn't, I think, underused instrument in an orchestra, so put that in as well.
The most dramatic part of the music must be at the end of the first movement leading into the second movement, where the confidence of investors was shaken because of the collapse of the Lehman Brothers. The music really speaks for itself once you have a listen to it. At the end of the first movement, everything's coasting along and suddenly, bam, like just things get really, really difficult. It's really intense.
Is the GFC over? Well, I did ask Gawain to finish the composition with a question mark, and that is because we maybe don't know the answer. There's a lot of unique things that are happening in the world of finance today, and the music does end with a bit of a question mark. So.
Initially, I was unsure how I was going to finish it, but Doug, he said to me, I mean, he had the initial inspiration for the piece. It's okay for him to specify, and I was fine with that. He specified he wanted a question mark. He wanted a musical uncertainty at the end of how is it going to get better? Is it going to get better? Are we going to have another crash or just around the corner? And so I wrote that into the music. I had a number of different suggestions from different people. I'm a democratic composer, if nothing else. So I incorporated a number of different suggestions, one of which was a drum roll fading off into the distance, but also the money-making waltz from the first thing comes back, da-da, da-da, and oh, there's a bit of hope again, and then at the end there's a tiny fall with the flute, di-di-di-di, and you go, oh, what was that? Is that a start of another crash? And the bass drum fades out and you just don't know how it's going to end, which is where we are right now.
The most challenging part of this project for me personally was to put myself in the perspective of someone who was going through this difficulty at that time. As musicians, we often don't engage the financial community. So this was a challenge and an opportunity for me to put myself in their shoes. And hopefully we've performed a piece of music that's relevant to them and that they enjoy and that they feel expresses what they were going through that time as well.
Well, I think it's a fantastic experience to hear the music for the first time tonight as we recorded it, and I do think that we were able to match all of the emotions to the music, and I hope people really enjoy that too.
Having just heard it for the first time with the orchestra, it's just such an amazing experience for me as a composer, as a beginning composer. I always wanted to write music, and to feel confident writing for orchestra, I always looked at my composing friends and went, oh, they can write great music for orchestra. I wonder if I'll ever get there. I feel like I've got to that point now. And having listened to it for the first time, I think it really works. I think it's a warm sound in a lot of the piece. I think it follows the emotions it's meant to. It's got the hope, it's got the joy, it's got the crash, the desolation, it's got the recovery and the looking towards the future, and then it's got everything I wanted it to have.
I'm studying an MBA at the moment, and we're doing corporate finance, and I always rub shoulders with people who are in this situation. And I'm the musician in a large group of like 60 people who are all just top-notch professionals. So this is a way where both worlds meet, which is very unusual. I find it quite remarkable. I hope that this piece gains traction. I hope people listen to it. More than that, I hope people enjoy it, and I hope that this will bring the finance community to appreciate and engage classical music in a new way.
This is a really international work. I think no matter where you were in the globe, you felt the global financial crisis, the waves of optimism, despair, and recovery. While commissioned and first played in Australia, we hope it finds great listening pleasure throughout the world.
I would love a performance of the piece because, you know, to have my friends and family there and other people who are interested in the piece watching, it would be so great. I feel like as a composer, my career is starting.
What's next for Symphony GFC is we need to get it heard by as many people who have a curiosity about finance and music and whether they meet together, and those who have a love of classical music and those who are die-hard finance people to be able to enjoy the music. We'd also like to garner enough support so that we can have a live performance of the symphony.
It doesn't just follow the GFC for me. For me, it's an overall piece that works from start to finish, and I'm proud to have created that.